And we are here at Vapor Central at 667 Yonge Street on the second floor for part of the Karma Cup Speaker Series.
So we're at Vapor Central 2018 Karma Cup Speaker Series.
Welcome to the Karma Cup Speaker Series, and we are welcoming a first-time speaker to the Karma Cup stage. We'd like to welcome Amanda de Freitas, is a Toronto-based regulatory compliance executive and lobbyist. She is also a corporate and securities law clerk who specializes in the Canadian cannabis legislation, and she is the CEO of Cannaceutical Canada Limited, a management consulting firm that focuses on global medical cannabis supply transactions and deal development. She is also president and founder of Cannabis Solutions Company Management, a consulting firm that works with domestic medical adult use cannabis businesses on the regulatory compliance, licensing, corporate product development, and strategies. So Amanda is actually here to speak to us about how to transition your cannabis business into the illicit market, into the new emerging legal market. We touched a bit on that with our previous speaker, Allison Gordon, and Amanda's going to take us to the next steps. So give us a round warm of applause and welcome to Karma Cup Speaker Series, Amanda de Freitas.
Thank you very much. Is my work? Yeah, it's working. Thank you, Tracy, so much. So thanks for coming, and I'm looking forward to meeting up with everyone at the exhibit part of the conference soon. As Tracy mentioned, my name is Amanda de Freitas. I am a Toronto-based right here. Hello?
There we go.
Right there? All right. So as Tracy mentioned, I'm by trade a law clerk. I joke that I typically in my career chase corporate and securities lawyers. Typically the work that they're doing in the capital markets is typically the work that I'm working on in the capital markets. And so the capital markets involve a number of different industries as cannabis has come to the public markets with different IPOs, and we just heard Allison Gordon speak from 48 North, and she's a publicly listed licensed producer as well. So as I got into the business from that perspective, doing simple corporate secretarial work for business upstarts, not necessarily cannabis, eventually all of my client base became cannabis businesses. So we started the firm Cannabis Solutions. So the first firm is Toronto-based management consulting, and we work with a lot of upstarts and deal teams. Our first clients were, and most of our clients are gray market market participants, and we help them with some of the initial legal work and corporate development work that's needed for to get the upstart process going, mainly business development plans, some initial legal templates for them to use, like mutual non-disclosure agreements and sort of work like that. And then on the corporate development level, we'll sort of look for different partners in the industry that your businesses are cohesive, or whatever it is required for your business model. It turned out to be, I learned very early in working with gray market guys that this business model was a difficult one to make any money at. I was collecting a lot of equity in future grow farms, and that's wonderful. I owe almost everything that I've learned in cannabis to the gray market clients, and particularly the medical growers, whom have not only taught me a lot about the regulation, they opened my eyes about the gray market economy, and in helping me understand what some of their challenges were from a business development perspective. As I began to get a growing base of clients, about a year ago, I probably started out going into the law firms, and I would have to whisper, "I'm in the gray markets." And now in the evolution of the years, we've seen the law firms now start to certainly be ready to work with gray market entrants. And we certainly see interest from the publicly listed companies in the space, with certainly Canada Royalty launched its Trichome business, and that focuses on, again, some of the new entry market folks. As we develop corporate clients, we ended up, ironically enough, our LP clients are global LP clients who've come basically to Toronto looking for partnerships with Canadian LPs for supply agreements for whatever region predominantly going into the German market. So we needed, essentially the difference between the two companies, they coincide with one another as far as the deals that we develop at Cannabis, and what we end up doing with them at Cannaceutical usually is the extension of the global product development, either into the US or in readiness for the European medical markets. So between the two companies, I sort of go back and forth. One of the exciting things about being a woman in this industry is that it's wonderful. I was very fortunate this week to be offered a board seat for a publicly listed company called Red Fund Capital. And, you know, it was an honor, and I'm looking forward to working with them. My husband and I think one of my first clients had texted me and said, "So, what does this mean for you?" I said, well, you know, there's only, we've got a growing book of listed companies on the stock market in the cannabis sector, and, you know, there's, I think, about 6. I think I'm only the 6th female board member to sit on the board of directors for a publicly listed trade company. So as a female, it's relevant and important and exciting from that perspective, and certainly as sort of bridging the past work that I've transitioned into the cannabis world with, it's a nice fit for validating and building on that experience, but then certainly going in as the board member that is, you know, from the cannabis sector at this point. It is important in that note to remember that everything that I speak about, my opinions are strictly my own. They are not at all representative of Red Fund Capital Corp's positioning on any issue. What I speak of and speak of openly is, you know, my own opinions of the industry. So the two different things I've sort of gone over with you, sort of what we do for the different clients. The deal intake, the phone calls, the reach outs, you never quite know where they're going. We've sort of gotten it down pat to sort of being able to go through really quickly, whether it's someone that we're able to work with. A lot of our gray market clients, you know, it's depending on where you're from and what place you're in the industry, the definition of what the gray markets can be subjective. So for the purposes of this presentation and as how we view it in the consulting that we do in clients that we're taking on, you know, the gray markets are basically this underground economy that is, if done to the T and done to the letter, is actually not technically illegal. You know, the exchange of cannabis from medical patient to medical patient is something that is done and allowed within limits, and so certainly an example would be one medical grower gives a pound of medical cannabis to another medical patient who might use it or that he's growing for, and that's great. That other secondary medical patient happens to be a drywaller, and so he completely, as a favor for the grower, will drywall his grow room. It's, you know, the important thing is that those are transactions that from an economic perspective, an economy perspective, they're unrecorded, they're untaxed, and, you know, from that perspective, it's moving forward in this market for gray markets. We have to sort of get to that point that there's not this barter and exchange of business. Once you become unlicensed or start to go onto the road of becoming a licensed private dispensary or microgrow or LP, you have to be careful in how you're conducting yourself, and you can't grow more than your plant license. You can't be caught doing that. And so there's a difference in how you do your business when you are a gray market and as you move into the white markets. So this sort of explains, gray market folks, most of them have medical grow licenses for personal grow or grow licenses for that they can grow on behalf of other medical patients. Different trenches of the licenses have been given out over the years. The original licenses were sort of given out because there wasn't a lot of inventory for Health Canada. They weren't growing a lot of. They had to open up. No.
There was a court case called Hitzig
Yeah.
that actually forced Health Canada to start growing medical cannabis.
Yes.
And then there was another court case that proved that that cannabis that allowed. So patients were originally given the right to grow for themselves.
Yes.
And then dispensaries became involved. There was a court case called Hitzig, and then with Allard. So the idea that they were allowed because there wasn't enough isn't actually the fact. The patients were allowed to grow first.
Yeah.
The reason that the industry actually had to open up is because it was a monopoly. So they either had to start looking at mass production on the legal market or lose it to the gray market or the illicit market, as they saw it.
At the end of the day, the two sides have different opinions about it. It all comes down to supply and demand. And it just wasn't enough supply to meet the demand, and it continues to be.
Who wasn't supplying?
No, there wasn't enough when we brought in legalization. There really wasn't enough supply for the government to say, we've got everything that you need, and patients knew much more about what was helping them. And so it made more sense to let the initial medical patients, compared to where we've gotten to now, grow their own. So certainly, from a legislative perspective, as we began to see some of the black market, not the gray market, the black market,
illicit market
sort of growing. We've got
cannabis amnesty next, so we ask that you kind of respect how you
exactly. And so
market.
It's not there became pressure in rolling out the MMRA.
MMPR. So there was the MMAR.
The secondary trench.
Actually, the third trench. So there was Section 56, then there was the MMAR, then there was the MMPR. So the MMPR became part of the legal regulations, and it's actually not been done through supply, demand, or anything like that. Most of these steps have been won through court cases.
And they have been, and so I acknowledge that. But for the purposes of my my presentation, a lot of people that come to me need a sort of an explanation of, they'll say, what is a grandfathered license? And so
that would be an MMAR.
Right. And so you sort of go through that. We don't go into all of the Allard case and how it moved the legislation and the timelines. You can't really explain that to people that are just getting into the industry, say for the micro, and they don't know some of the history. So you sort of have to explain to them why some people have.
Well, what I'm just trying to say is that the phrasing, the way that you put it, was that there wasn't enough supply from the government, so the government gave people the chance to grow.
Okay, so I will retract that wording, and let's just agree that the supply initially when
the opposite of that is true, is that patients were given the right to grow first.
Yes.
And then supply was given through the Hitzig case.
Absolutely. And so, obviously, the government felt a need to have to take control of the personal growing that was taking place. And so, through different court cases, there's been a different evolution of where we've gotten to as far as the legalized markets. So, where the gray market economy and growers sit in that is many of them have their own personal grow licenses that they've received at different parts in different stages of the legislation. Some of them are original licenses that if they've kept up their licensing and patient obligations, they have been able to hold on to those grandfathered licenses. Some of our clients have grow licenses that range from 10 grams a day up into 88 grams a day. Certainly explaining to someone why you need 88 grams a day is not, that person is making products with that 88 grams a day. Yeah, if you are solely looking to just cook and make your own personal edibles, you can actually need that amount of license to be able to produce different products. So some of the challenges for the gray market ventures right now is through the course of legalization and all of the folks that have moved the needle on developing the industry. Many of the medical growers and different people involved in the industry have criminal convictions that are related to cannabis possession, sales. And so that's an ongoing development that needs to be sort of addressed in a better way. Just in the last 2 years alone, we've amassed a number of young people who have gotten into different parts of the industry, whether it's working for an illegal, unlicensed dispensary or whatnot, and they're sort of amassing these criminal charges. And it's unfair because as they see the industry build around them, oftentimes working at an unlicensed dispensary can be that entry level into the cannabis industry for young people. And so that can be a barrier issue that we're getting some levity on, as long as you're not looking at criminal history with violence or weapons. Then you have a good chance of being able to work in the industry. There's a lack of access to, of course, mainstream sources of capital. If you were starting a nail salon, you'd be able to go into your RBC branch and or TD or CIBC, any of the banks, and really be able to get a $100,000 line of credit to be able to get the facility, get the equipment, and within a month and a half you could be up and running and earning an income. It's not a possibility yet for folks that are doing upstarts and getting their businesses going in the gray market, so that can be a challenge. There's a lack of access to legal services, industry networking, and opportunities. The way the big guys are doing it is certainly in networking, and there's a lot of business mentorship that they have in one another. And if you've got enough money and the board and you've raised your capital, being able to walk into a Bay Street law firm to represent you is much easier than it is for a lot of the gray market folks. There isn't really that space for folks to learn easy answers to questions that just will sort of put them in the right direction for 3 months. They just have to kind of, there's no access for that. Product creation also involves access to cannabis. So if you're not a grower, but you are working on any kind of product, you need to be able to access cannabis. And so accessing it technically, if you're doing it well, it can be legal if it's from patient to patient, but if you're not, that can be an issue. There's businesses that have, we've got gray market businesses right now that are starting to get to the stage where they've done enough. Typically speaking, if there's any sort of business, before you go to a lender or investor, they'll want $500,000 in sales that you can produce. Right now, we're at many of the gray market brands have produced $500,000 in sales from patient to patient sales, and so they are now starting to get at the position where they're getting offers from LPs, partnerships, co-alignments, even supply deals, and they're getting some easier access to capital, and certainly in relationships with different LP producers or investors, we're seeing less emphasis on an equity cut coming from the grower, and more emphasis on just, here's $100,000. We want 12% interest. We'd like it paid every month, principal and interest. And so we're starting to see some of that. The private licensed dispensaries, we all know, was a game changer. I would say in both the business that we do at Cannabis Solutions as well as Cannaceutical Canada, for the first half of the month, it was all about Europe. It's all we heard about the Canadian LPs doing. It was all the reach outs that we got. Everybody was madly on their plan to produce or get access and have supply agreements to the European standard of cannabis, which is GMP grade. So once the micro licenses opened up, we began to, the private dispensary developments in Ontario. We saw a really swift change from, now we're looking at almost every retailing LP is scrambling to come up with a potential dispensary model that will rival and compete with, other models like Tokyo Smoke. And so that's what's also happened too with the microgrow opening up is there's a lot more interest for LPs to be working with some of the potential microgrow cultivators. And we suspect, or we're hopefully optimistic, that obviously microgrowers will be able to grow to sell to the provincial purchasers, and it's looking like the licensed producers as well. So, we're starting to see, too, some of our cultivators getting full-out supply agreement deals from LPs. That's great if you are a medical grower who is really just growing in excess for contingency and just want to make a little money and just sell it to that one party. That's great. If you're one of our clients who's a medical patient and is plays the right music to your crops, and most of our growers have to live where they're cultivating because it's a 24-hour day, and they put an awful lot into their cannabis. So those folks typically want to know that the end destination for the cannabis and whom they're selling it to is going to be in the medical patient arena. Some of the licensed producers now at a corporate level, they have a number of reasons that they can be buying all of your supply. And so our suggestion is that you just have to sort of really pick their minds and get clarity on what it is. Are they using it? Are they using it for research and development? Are they scanning it for genes, genetic new information in the strains? Are they using it for research and development? There's a number of things that a licensed producer could be using it for. So if that part is important to you, then you need to be asking those questions with those offers. Big, huge trend is lab builds. Everybody's in the mad race to build labs. There's not enough of them. The ones that we have are owned by one large licensed producer, and that's made it a problem for every other licensed producer. We have only one, although there's many ready to sort of be completed, one GMP lab. I'll explain a bit on the relevance of GMP, but that's the big trend. And so even with our microgrow clients, we're seeing secondary, there's a lot of executives who are in their second trench of the cannabis business, and once they become publicly listed companies, they're not always able to sort of follow their passions, and so we're seeing a lot of secondary businesses start up from people in the industry and people emerging into the industry, and it's about labs. If we've got a microgrow client who the best fit for them is a lab, and they're starting from the ground up, we'll usually speak to them about building a GMP lab. And I'll explain a little bit about that later. Products, brands, forms, all forms, everything. We're seeing everything that you can put on your body, put in your body, breathe into your body, be around your body, everything. And so it's wide open market for that stuff. Pet care products, we're seeing a lot of that stuff. I mentioned some of the business trends. They're all sort of, we're starting to see, like I said, we're starting to see some movement with the CBD lines that are strictly CBD now going into the space of we are going to add a THC brand. So we're starting to see some of the initial market development brands evolve into the THC space. And lending is starting to be, it's still a very difficult environment, you know, depending on the relationship that you have with your bank. You might be able at this stage to be able to go in and explain what you like the lending for. It's a micro grow program, and you know they're slowly getting there, but we still have a ways to way, and it's still a lot of you know, LPs investing into the gray market industry and in business development and lending, and a lot of private investors that are still doing the lending. So getting started, the legislation, it's arduous and it's long, but if you're going to be in the business, early on I learned that most of my clients knew the legislation better than I did. And so, you know, you have to at least be familiar of the parts of the legislation that are relevant to your business. A business plan. It's important that you put something on paper. It's your own business, and once you get very quickly, as you begin this process, you can't make deals that are just verbal in the white markets. And so the business plan is the first thing. I can reach out. I tell my clients all the time, I'm like, I've talked to her, I've talked to him. They want something from me. And the next thing is, you know, when I do a reach out conversation with someone at an LP or an investor, they'll say, no, not what we're looking for, no. Or they'll say, yeah, you know what, we'll look at that, send me something. And so we have to be able to send that to a person or a company. So you have to get on side with that. It can be a problem because they're expensive documents for a firm to write for you. And, you know, they can range from $3,500 for the cheapest ones to $10,000. You don't have to sink that much into it. You can do it yourself. There's resources. I put resources here. If you check out Mars, is technology-based, but cannabis is very technology complicated as well. And so you can simply go in and edit those templates to suit your business. The BDC also has templates that you can use for your business development plan, and some of your agreements, your contract employee agreements, and a shareholders founder agreement is an important one, and you can get templates there. So the next thing that we typically look at when we're talking with a client is their deal team. Deal teams, when you're first getting rolling, it's really, really easy to sort of meet people at this event and that event that will help you, and you build your team, and you can have your team far too big at the beginning. And so you really have to look at your deal team, make sure that everyone's got a purpose and brings value to it. Since a lot of these upstart initiatives are, you know, sweat equity based, you really need to make sure that everybody's sort of putting their own perspective and work into the endeavor, because it will come up later on. And so even in the role that I would be in on, say, a grow-op team, which would be regulatory and corporate development, the work that I'm doing is hard to validate when I'm not part of the 24-hour grow, trimming, lighting, you know, the work that's being put into the grow-op. And so you really have to sort of organize who's doing what on the team and trim the fat. The next big thing is, doesn't matter what you're doing, if it's a grow-op, a private dispensary license that you're planning to pursue, is real estate. We suggest with the real estate, you start with doing your best to meet the ACMPR requirements, and then you need to look at the municipality that you're planning to lease or buy in, and some municipalities are friendly, some aren't. You can typically sort of look by Googling the town council, and you'll see other proposals that they've had for cannabis businesses, and you'll see what the comments were. And so we start with looking there. And if you've hit those 2 boxes, then it's still not a guarantee. You know, you can have a municipal representation change, and by the time you get to your final licensing, you could still be dealing with lobby issues. So everyone in the business, big or small, will tell you the real estate search is one of the hardest parts, but it's one of the things that you really have to have first. You can't have an application sent into Health Canada and not, you know, have that locked down. You can't change the location, you'll get your application rejected. Financials, you know, really tricky. The question is, you know, if you're starting upstart, for me, I have my own problem, and it's a female business entrepreneur problem. We spoke a little bit about this. I'm reluctant to borrow any money for my business that requires me to put up an equity stake for my family home or my family money. I've got 4 kids, they have to go to university. We've got one steady income coming in with my husband, and so figuring out the finances is something that you have to do really early on. Are you willing to borrow against your own equity? Are you willing to do the work and just have an investor come in as an owner and help fund it? And so figuring out, then producing the financials is an issue altogether. You can do them yourself based on simple guides and templates. Getting an auditing firm to do it or an accounting firm to do it is very difficult right now because, again, they focus on being able to give you projections, financial projections that are usually based on economies that exist. So in the case of edibles, there's no financial projections that you can really accurately put in place. And so also if your income and your past sales have been $500,000 in gray market patient sales, those are different. Those are difficult financial numbers for a law for an financial statement for you. And so you don't really need an audited financial statement at this stage of the game. You don't need them to apply for licensing. You need them at the stage where you are looking to reach out to other LP producers for joint partnerships or, you know, complicated processing or supply deals. Subject matter expertise. So first deals were great, full of subject matter expertise, no money. And so you develop them to that point, and that's how I actually ended up finding Red Fund Capital, is because I needed to find money. And you have to remember that if now what's happened with deals is I'll get a great deal, there will be a lawyer on team, they've got all the money in the bank ready to go, they've got the land, but there's no one that knows a thing about cannabis. And so, you know, and I tell people, they're like, well, can't you just hire someone? The IP drain in the Canadian economy right now for experts that can grow excellent cannabis is a big problem. It's a difficult problem for all of the LPs. Some of the barriers that we've got with past criminal records, totally suffocating the number of amazing master growers that we could be bringing to the table. And so, you know, I explained to those folks, it's great that you've got money, we can do it really fast. You're looking at least $150,000 for me to bring a grow team in and help you get that's cheap. Get your setup done, show you the plans. They'll work with you for 3 months until you've got that great crop, but you better have figured that out, because even just hiring expertise to build on that, and so that's a key component. You need to have someone that's got some kind of cannabis expertise on your deal team. Obviously there's the application guide. Health Canada put out an application guide in July. It's on the website. It is the closest thing we have to a manual for how to do things. If you're familiar with looking at the ACMPR LP licensing process, it's very, very similar. It almost looks identical criteria at this point. And so that's one of the first things we give to our clients. I send all the acts off to them, all the regulations, and it's at least they have it as a resource to kind of weed through. Literally, legislation. And so lawyers, this was my very first conversation with a grower in the gray markets, was I could tell he wanted a lawyer. I just couldn't tell what type of lawyer it was. And so, you know, there's the criminal lawyers. The city's full of them. In our space, we've got criminal lawyers that are actually statutory change lawyers. They are lawyers, Jack Lloyd, Paul Lewin, Kurt Tuso. They take on criminal cases that, if they win, are precedent setting. And that is how essentially all of the cannabis legislation has begat and evolved up until then. So those folks, don't go in when you've gone to see them and, tell them about your business plan and can they help you. They will say no. And so a corporate lawyer, every business needs a corporate lawyer, whether it's in-house or external. They handle the matters of the business, basically the Canada Business Corporation Act. There's a bunch of things you have to do as a company to stay compliant in your regulatory disclosures and filings. A securities lawyer will work alongside a corporate lawyer, and they basically are the lawyers that turn your company into shares. And they become important because if you've got deal teams or family owners that make up your company, at some point there needs to be a value to the ownership, and so a securities lawyer does that part of it, and they are the ones that are really running. They're the main clients for the big LPs right now. Corporate is secondary at this point. Now it's a securities lawyer that's bringing you to market and dealing with you in different business once you're a publicly listed company. A lobbyist. The Lobbyist Act, I'm speaking basically in reference to Ontario Lobbyist Act. A lobby it doesn't have to be a lawyer. It can be anyone. If you look on the Ontario lobby registry, you'll see almost every Canadian cannabis company is listed on it as an in-house representative. And so if you're reaching out to a government official as a taxpayer to your MPP and saying, listen, we don't want vape lounges in our municipality because we don't think it's great, we don't think it's, we don't want it, you're reaching out to that official as a taxpayer, unless, of course, you've got some covert business objective that is counterintuitive to dispensaries. But generally speaking, you can reach out to a government official as a taxpayer. If you're reaching out to a government official at any level to talk to them and convince them that your business plan in cannabis is going to be great for the economy, it's going to bring value, and you're basically a pitch for getting a license approval or getting the laws changed or getting the markets opened up. As a business, you can't be taught, you can't reach out to a government official and speak to them about your own business interests. You need to be on the Ontario lobby registry, or you need to have a lobbyist. Sorry? I know, and so I'm explaining it to you. If you don't, I could talk for an hour on the lobbyist thing. I'm on the lobby registry for our own clients. If I've got the Amnesty Fund right now, say the Amnesty Fund came to me and said, Amanda, we want you to lobby for this. We want you to go to all the LPs and get them to give $50,000 each. I would go on the lobby registry. I would charge them at least $750, and I would be on there as Cannaceutical Canada for the Amnesty lobby. You can go on there and register your own business. You have to read the Lobby Act, go through it quickly, and make sure that you are complying and that you understand what your roles are. But there's grassroots lobbying that happens in the business that is not an official lobby because we're in the gray markets. But oftentimes, it was an early question that one of my clients asked me, and why can't my criminal lawyer do this? She's saying you need a lobbyist because you need her to change the law, and it's a corporate law, or it's different. So what makes the difference between a cannabis regulatory lawyer? So people like DPAC, Harrison Jordan, they are in the business of sort of not as much the criminal component of it, but they tie in the corporate, the securities, the lobbying part, and everything that goes into, including the next point, which is real estate, everything that's going into you getting your LP license. It's important to have a cannabis regulatory person on your team. We are that person initially in your deal team. Later on, you'll have the right lawyer who will be that person, or once your business is at the right stage, you'll hire someone in-house that will do that role for you. Real estate. real estate, it's always part of your plan. It's always an issue. And so if you're thinking that the one lawyer that you got that's going to sit on your board can help you with all of these things, they can't. You will need a separate real estate lawyer to deal with the things that you're doing in that perspective. I'm not going to go through all the legislation. We all know it. It's all right there. The point of putting it there is to give you an idea. So if you're just sort of getting through the Cannabis Act, then you're going back to the ACMPR to understand that. Then you begin to realize that you've got the Narcotics Control Act, the Food and Drug Act, several schedules that are embedded. And so just, you can be reading a clause and referring to section blah, blah, blah. You literally have to have the 6 acts kind of in front of you so that you can get through it. And so there's a number of them. If you have, as far as deal teams go, you need someone working full time on that part of it, or you need to hire someone. And so it's great if you have a deal team that there's someone that isn't working full time and has the time to do the research, the reading, and the notes. You can absolutely do it yourself without having to have a lawyer or even having to retain us to do it. It is possible. You just need to have the time to do it. So again, deal team, you need cannabis science expertise, regulatory compliance expertise. You need someone that can manage the business, and that's usually the corporate development part of it. And in this space, it would be, finding supply deals, making sure the banking is set up properly, making sure the taxes are paid, that bank deposits are made. And so you need someone that's running the business of the management of the business. And then you need finance management. You need someone that is either an external accountant. You should have someone on your team that can speak to finance, has a background in finance, has a CA. But those are the key components just to apply for an LP. And the designated individuals, if you've got a small team, you're basically breaking them up this way. Someone who's got the cannabis, the science, regulatory oversight, the business management, and the finances. Deal team dynamics are very, very important. You need to cut the fat out early. If they're, partners that you've been rolling with since you're a teenager, once you get to the point where you have to ask for investor fund, you need to be, everyone that's being paid out of the deal needs to be able to bring value to it. And so you really have to nail down, a lot of times we'll see a deal team of 6 go right down to 2. It ends up coming down to the 2 people that have the biggest stake in it. And so cut out the people that are not going, that maybe helped you in the past, but if they're not helping you going forward, then you have to have that make those early decisions. Again, you have to decide what every partner's doing, because you will have fights, it will bust apart, the deal won't happen unless everyone's roles are defined. Evaluate sweat equity, the hardest part of it. Sweat equity can be different forms in a deal team, and so you have to really put your own price on sweat equity, and from there, investors will decide, or other partners will decide, if that's valuable or not as part of the deal team. You have to be family businesses. We get a lot of family businesses. They're very, very unique. They're some of the best deal teams that actually end up doing something and making things, happen. They're also very complicated. Business come with different dynamics, and so really, again, laying out who the family stakeholders are, and sort of learning how to work as a family in a business can have unique challenges. I've mentioned founder shareholders agreements. There are several other documents that in the course of working with our clients that we are in line for getting signed. Mutual non-disclosure agreement is the first one. Before we sometimes get all the corporate documents filed and the board set up, I will oftentimes do up a founder shareholder agreement template, and I'll plug in based on everything. It's like, oh, you said you're going to make $80,000 a month in retail cannabis sales based on that person's 20%. You're going to owe him $13,000 every month. Are you cool with that, right? And so putting those numbers down into a founder shareholder agreement early on is important, because it spells out what this agreement is that you're entering into, and just giving away 10% of your equity to someone that's kind of helped you or that you like a lot it's going to hurt later if your business is worth $5 million and you've given away 10%. So you have to sort of figure that out early on. Corporate setup, you're basically identifying your partnerships, if it's going to be Ontario-based, federal-based, what you're going to be doing. If you're doing something just in the Ontario economy, a private Ontario corporation, it's the cheapest and it's all you need. If you plan to do business from province to province or outside of Canada, you're better going with a federally incorporated company that's private. In the process, you can certainly change. If you set it up as a sole proprietorship in the beginning, which, funny enough, one of our first company, Cannabis, is set up, that you can change it later on at minimal cost, but it helps to sort of have your corporation set up early on. So I've mentioned the business plans, they're essential, and if you reach out, the price target is $3,500 to $10,000, and those are not unreasonable prices for the amount of work that has to go into them. So get someone in your network that can help you write it if it's not your forte, but you have to have a business plan. Once you give the business plan to us, we will amend it and clean it up so that it's presentable to whatever party it is that we're presenting it to. But you have to provide us with that for you. We can't just plug in your details and present it. Like I said, the business plan, when you're in the gray markets, everything is built trust built. You meet someone, we'll put you in touch with this person, then you need to meet that person and decide if you trust them and if you want to work with them. Once you get into the white markets, it's not like that. When you're dealing with a firm, they have staff. That staff is going to help you with that. That staff cannot come out and meet you 3 or 4 times while you build a level of trust. You have to move to the position of not relying on verbal agreements that are handshake-based and trust-based. You have to start relying on written agreements. And so that starts with a mutual non-disclosure agreement. You should be able to sit down and speak with someone about your idea, whether it's someone that's in the space, that could be a competitor, or someone that competes with me, who, if you don't have that agreement signed, they can do anything with your idea. So that is some of the early reasons for having it. In the deal development stage, you have different, like I've said, we've got the mutual non-disclosure agreement, the business plan. Part of that will usually include a pitch deck, like you see here. In that is the financials I've explained, and so that package, if you're paying $10,000 for a business development plan, you should be getting the whole written 15-page, 10-page document that includes a pitch deck that you can hand out, and that also includes, some financials. Again, it's a difficult place to have them audited, so as close as you can get. A term sheet is basically your business plan, pitch deck, and financials in a one-pager. It's usually set up like a table, and it basically lays out the terms to the agreement that you're looking for. A letter of intent is usually the initial agreement. So say you are a cannabis, a medical craft cannabis grower, and you've got, you're reaching out to an LP because you'd like to have them buy all of your supply, or buy your supply in exchange for a 5% cut and $200,000 investment. What we would provide to that LP would be in the form of a letter of intent. And it's basically it's a non-binding agreement written in legalese that tells the story of what it is, who you are and what you're looking for, and what the commitments that you want in a partner. And so that the LP receiving it would look at it and go, okay, we'll look at you, you know what, we want 20%. And you negotiate the terms of the letter of intent. The only thing that's binding about it is the non-disclosure of information. And so once the letter of intent either goes nowhere or it develops to the point that both sides agree on the terms, and so then we would move to what's called a memorandum of understanding, and that is a legally binding document that basically puts in a more broader detail the contract agreement between you and the licensed producer. So if you're an edibles client, your contract with the licensed producer might include purchasing supply from them. It also might help include assistance in helping to get edibles licensing. And it can also include, an equity cut for the LP. So different terms get sort of plugged into these different agreements, and at the end, by the time you're finished, you've signed a memorandum of understanding, and your deal is done. And so those are the main documents that you have to be familiar with, and understanding how to be presented to a corporation for any kind of stakeholder interest, and what it ends up looking at once the deal is signed and deal's signed and done. So in the real estate, like I said, it's the beginning of the most important part of everyone's search. You've got the land and the premises search. You've got due diligence to make sure that it's going to meet the ACMPR standards, is what we're referring to them right now, or the municipal requirements. You need to talk about figuring the acquisition part of it. Are you buying it or are you leasing it? There's a number of good advantages to leasing. If you're planning to build a facility on a leased property, you'll be looking at you want to be able to negotiate a long-term lease agreement, 20, 30 years. If you're building a lab, GMP or not, you want a long-term lease that's the life of the facility that you're building and that you're financing. The financing, you have to decide, are you getting a mortgage, partners coming in? Oftentimes, right now, we see landowners who know nothing about cannabis do want to get into the game, and so they become partners in just being the landowner, and that's an option instead of having to come up with a lot of capital to purchase your own property. These are all of the different issues that you can expect to have to deal with in the land search and acquisition. You're dealing with a real estate agent, ideally maybe a mortgage broker, a real estate lawyer, as mentioned before. You'll need the land survey, that's the easy part of it, but you also typically need a land feasibility survey, and that can be a bit more expensive. If you're doing anything like building on the property or planning to harvest industrial hemp, anything like that, you'll need the land feasibility reports. Water, hydro upgrades, all of that has to be dealt with, and so you have to consider that in the properties that you're looking for. You ideally want properties that have a hydro run and water, city water going to them, but it's not all the case, so those are important considerations. Federal, provincial, municipal approval, obviously. You need to look at all of the criteria, making sure the property that you're looking at is going to be compliant. As I've mentioned before, you have to look at the municipality and figure out the town council. If you are in the city of Ajax, Ontario, Ajax is not a cannabis-friendly town council. It's something that they do not want, and so it might not be the best location in Durham. Maybe Whitby and Oshawa is better to look at, and so that's just an example. You also want to I'd mentioned, the pros and cons between leasing, and, leasing can be a challenge if you don't have a landlord that knows a lot about the cannabis industry. It can be very difficult to find properties to lease. We're finding that particularly right now with people looking for private dispensary locations. So it's great if you can find a potential landowner that you can help educate, as one of our craft growers has been able to do. It's possible, and sometimes it's just sort of giving people some industry insight on the legality of what you're proposing. So again, I've explained the financials, explained why it's important to have subject matter experts. I wanted to go into a bit more about what GMP is and GPP. They are processing standards that end up with a certification. In Canada, North America, our standard is GPP. And it's good processing practices. It involves almost everything that humans ingest. So right now, some of the most people with the most GMP experience are food processors who produce goods that go into the European market. GMP is Europe's standard of processing that all products going into Europe must meet. Very relevant in cannabis because, like I said, cannabis going into the German markets must be GMP certified. It cannot be GPP certified. And so that's why you're seeing a lot of the Canadian LPs take some interest in building GMP facilities here and abroad. And it is because that's what will be required to go into the German marketplace. German marketplace is, huge based on the fact that they consider themselves, they've got the highest standards of pharmaceutical processing standards and research development standards. They're also a nation that's very top of the game with naturopathic medicine. Their culture, they easily adapt and try new and different things. It's a very large population, and the big ticket here with Germany is that the German government is going to be paying for medical cannabis. Cannabis in Germany, black market, is very expensive, and so they're expecting most recreational users will apply for medical licenses, and the government will be supporting that. And so it's a big industry, it's a big market, and that's why you're seeing a lot of Canadian LPs going into that space. If you're an upstart or thinking of just building a small 5,000 square foot facility, do it GMP, because that will make your product, after it's certified, globally exportable. Everything else you produce will have to stay in Canada, or maybe you'll be able to send GPP product to Jamaica eventually. But right now, doing a GMP product or build gives you global access for your business. LP data, I've just kind of put this up there quickly. Everyone, a lot of my gray guys are feeling left out and left behind in the market. This number that we've got, 800 in the pipeline, what everyone needs to sort of put in perspective, if you're here in Ontario, there's less than 200 applications in the pipeline. We are looking at an incredible supply problem in our country and globally. If you were working towards an LP application in your facility build or your business build, it's still possible to do that. What we're telling our clients is, depending on their ability with their land, is that they prioritize getting a dispensary license, because being the first in the market is the most important. Secondary is to look at applying for micro-grow licenses, especially if you're a talented micro-grow, medical personal grower. Micro-grow will be for adult use, and so you will be able to take that micro-grow produce and sell it to the provincial outlets for adult use. So keep that in mind. LP applications are not something of the past. They're still to be worked towards. You don't need to build a 1 million square foot facility, but you can still get into the race really early with only 200 in Ontario. This is a bit of a, sort of a bit of a spreadsheet. The different people that, were coming to us as business, most of them are cultivators, many are not. Many are going into the different product segments depending on their specialty.
I am going to have to interrupt, and I'm hoping that, I'm sorry that I have to cut you short,
nope,
but
that's fine.
We are 10 minutes over at this point. So we do have to get on to our next speaker.
That's okay, I ended up covering everything.
Quick little switch over.
Yeah.
But thank you so much. And if you actually, Andrew, if they want to contact you and they want more information, how do they do that?
You can contact us through the Cannaceutical Canada website or the Cannabis Solutions website. I'm on LinkedIn. You can connect with me
Awesome.
there.
So for those of you watching and want more information, and hopefully, can you make that presentation available online anywhere?
I can give it to you if you would like.
Awesome, and we'll see if we can make that available to people that are viewing online as well.
Yeah.
So thank you again so much. We're going to take a quick 10-minute break while we make some tech switches, and we're going to have our next presenter. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And also, if you're anywhere near Toronto, come on down to Vapor Central here for today and tomorrow. More speakers tomorrow.